it's shaky ground as it is. That do all these souls deserve it? Were they perfect? Were they like God? All these things that really has nothing to do with Christianity as it stands. If we find out there is one day, I mean that. I mean, that would be like people say, well, what if reincarnation is real? I don't know if it's not 100%, but again, that wouldn't be so. It's just like when people used to debate, well, if there's life form on Mars, that means there's not, God isn't real. Well, just because there's bacteria on Mars, there could be whole civilizations out in different planets. I still don't see how that affects Christianity. But no, it's not part of orthodoxy, so it doesn't matter. What is interesting about historical research is I've read he has a preface in one of the books where he says he's theorizing and does not necessarily hold these views. Yeah, I mean, he wasn't, I've read that in a couple things, and even in pseudonymous things. About Origen, do I remember that exactly? No, I know Augustine said that about some of the things. I mean, he almost goes to the Filioque, but he says, but I cannot hold, I do not hold this view, but I could see it logically going out like that or something like that. He pulls back right from endorsing the Filioque. It sounds, Origen sounds like something that sounds like something Origen would. Are all sorts of questions about interpolations of his work, perhaps. I think he's fairly understandable. I mean, I read that one part, and that's just a little excerpt of him talking about, you know, interpreting things too literally. So he goes over them. I mean, he doesn't really have just throwaway remarks, you know, like you'll find in Paul. He's a pretty intelligent guy, even though I believe he was just taught by his father or his mother. He just had a familiar education, meaning family taught. I believe his father taught him to read and write, and his father was martyred when he was at the age of 18. I think it was directly after that he wanted to be martyred. You could, you know, you can sympathize with that, but don't quote me on that. It might have been a few years later. I know it might have been before. Well, either way. I do not know too much about I do not know too much, but didn't Rufus translate him into Latin? I believe you're right, yeah. Did he really castrate himself, or could that be his opponent's gossiping? I think I already addressed that. If what I said didn't satisfy you, I can actually do a whole video on it, if you'd like me to. And I've already gone over the 15-minute mark, so this is split into 2 videos. The Church rejects Origen's apostasis specifically because of the way his beliefs were eventually formulated. Origen seems to suggest that there will eventually be saved because of all the rational souls pre-existed their reincarnation in direct presence of God, and therefore must eventually make their way back to this same presence of God with the same glory as they had previously. His view on pre-existent souls and eternalness of creation is what is condemned. Yes, but you say reincarnation in here. I don't necessarily think that's the that's what he held. I don't think he actually held reincarnation. What I see Origen is believing in is, yes, he had this idea of there's something pre-existent, right? But he never denied a physical resurrection. I mean, he believed that it was almost like a child, or, you know, we talk about this seed, and the seed goes in the person, and the whole person dies, and then it comes out as something new of life. Almost 2 things coming together, then being buried in the, you know, living, and then being buried in the ground, and then coming out transfigured. And again, if he's holding to the orthodox view of the afterlife, which I think he is, you can see if we're all going to this kind of inverse purgatory, we're going to be in the presence of sheer love for eternity, and that will either be a burning hell to us, or a refining. It's used refining away the dross. You know, there is some kind of struggle that we automatically go through. Not that we're struggling towards God, we're struggling with ourselves to kind of almost look up at the light, you know, not be raped by God, almost basically just but our own thing. Are the people in hell just the chunks of silver where there's too much dross on it, and you know, and eventually it'll be totally worn away. Now, I think that many people will almost feel like they're in hell initially, while being saved. You know, people talk about this almost agony of trying to return to the body, but that they were going closer to something. You know, even with near-death experiences. I'm not saying near-death experiences are real by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying that even if you look at the imagery of what the human experience has, and it's called a walk, and you know, run the race to win it, and all these analogies, growing in Christ and all this kind of stuff, that you could say, yeah, I mean, orthodoxy almost presumes that most people will eventually be there. There's a lot of talk about this in early works that become heterodox but aren't necessarily Gnostic, and then there are even docetic works that and Gnostic works that do teach this. So where does the line draw? You can understand where it comes from, but we do say affirmatively that two will never get out of hell, and the gates of hell are locked from the inside. So I guess you can resist God for eternity, apparently, and that will be the devil and Arius. Clement, yeah, he steps too far with the even the demons will get out of hell, and this kind of thing. But I don't know if he actually goes into transmigration of the soul. It's easy to imagine that he would, though, because of the Neoplatonism and the Plato and Plotinus and these views going around at that time. But I don't remember him ever expressly talking about reincarnation. I think that's an inference that many people make, and it's an easy jump to make. Other than his views related to these issues and a couple of things, he is the best Orthodox scriptural commentator of the early and mid-3rd century, bar none, and second only to his teacher, Clement of Alexandria. I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, Clement of Alexandria was his teacher. You can see the succession. I mean, it's very easy to see. Yeah. When it comes to comprehensive Christian approach to philosophy and education of the first 5 centuries of the church, Michael, I think you're absolutely right. I believe I say something to that effect or try to convey that in this video that you commented on. It's really worth reading his stuff, especially De Principles, of the principles, or of first principles, or however that gets translated. I can send people a link to, well, I'll put a link in the description boxes of, I guess, this video that'll be split in half, in both parts. It's quite a shame there is no church father of his intellectual caliber in discussion with him during his lifetime to discuss his problematic beliefs with him. That's true. But then again, I'd rather have Origen than not have Origen. I mean, it's understandable why he came to the conclusions that he did, and things like that. I mean, we often read about people talking about idols and images and blasting them, but we never see them as iconoclastic. Because they're essentially speaking against the evils and the abuses. With Origen, this is why we don't see him as docetic or Gnostic or anything like that, because you can see where he's coming from, just as you could see, where, I mean, I particularly don't like Epiphanius. Many argue that Epiphanius actually never argued against images, that he was arguing against these abuses of them, and that he'd gone too far, just like, in the Bible it reads, the prophets speak as God and say, your sacrifices and your incense offend me. Well, nobody says that, the sacrifices were outlawed and burning of incense was, God never commanded it. Now, Pandarus Bach said that at one point, and he might even probably say, yeah, that wasn't correct. Sometimes he just argues things to argue them. It's too bad that we stopped talking. I actually kind of liked speaking with him on intellectual things. It's just, well, you guys know how that all went down. Well, we did kind of talk, you know, after that, and then it just kind of just fell out of talking. But yeah, that's all the comments, and peace to you, Megatsu, Serbia, Syria, and Ireland, and yeah, I'm naked today. And looks, this will be 2 parts, so this is, if you're watching, this is the end of part 2.